Yeah. Sorry.
So, land history institution.
All right. So now we're looking at, we've looked at the scriptures, and at this point we're looking at and moving towards the kind of the land, a bit of the history, and then. Oh, I'm sorry. So we're looking at the land, a bit of the history, and then some of the institutions that are present there in the New Testament era. And what this is doing is it's providing us some of the context that we can use to read the scriptures and better understand what it is that they're talking about. So it's helping us to have context. So let's begin by looking at the biblical lands. So if we look at a map, what I have here is the biblical lands today. So these are like the modern country divisions, kind of overlaid with some of the lands of the biblical era.
You said Jesus was from Iraq, right? Or was Iraq today?
No.
That was Egypt.
No, he was born in Jerusalem, but then he fled to Egypt and then went back into, to Israel, or from Bethlehem.
And it's the same Jerusalem and Egypt that's today, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It's a little bigger now, but with the same general area. But anyway, I mean, so this is Syria, modern Syria. This is Iraq. Now, the creation account and the early biblical history took place between the Tigris and Euphrates River. So we're over here somewhere, and then Abraham journeyed over here to the Promised Land. I just want us to see kind of most of the history, most of what we're talking about in the New Testament is in modern day Jerusalem. There will be some crossover. He will go over to Syria and perhaps crossed over into Jordan, what is modern day Jordan. But most of it took place between the Dead Sea and Jerusalem. Really, I'm not sure that the Dead Sea really comes into play that much in the New Testament. It may, I can't remember. And the Sea of Galilee up here. And then the Jordan River, which runs betwixt, the two. It's one of my favorite words, betwixt. So anyway, we see the modern lands of what we're dealing with there. So now we're looking at this section here, and we're kind of closing in on it a little bit. And what you see is, and this is all contained in your book, but you have these topographical areas that are characterize this land. So you have the coastal plains that run along the coast here. You'll notice that there aren't that many. From what I understand, these shores are not very good shores and not very conducive to harbors and stuff like that. So there aren't a lot of port cities on here, and the people of Israel, basically you don't read anything hardly about the Mediterranean Sea and that stuff. That just doesn't come into play in the Bible. But you have this coastal plain here, and then you have this central mountain range. So Jerusalem, the Sea of, let me pull my map down here, or pull this down. That'll help us to see it a little better. So you have the Sea of Galilee, which is up here. The Jordan River, which runs down there. That's the river Rift, I'm sorry. The central mountain plains kind of run through here up to the coast. And Jerusalem is right here. So in the Bible, you often read of them going up to Jerusalem. Well, they're coming from north to south, but they're going up to Jerusalem. Why?
It's higher.
Because of its elevation. So they're traveling upwards, to Jerusalem, one of the high points there. So then you have the Dead Sea area here, and this river rift. I think the Dead Sea isn't that one of the lowest places on the earth? Something like
Yeah.
1,200 feet below sea level or something like that.
Yeah.
I've been to the Dead Sea. I've floated in it, so it's kind of neat.
Ain't it the saltiest sea too, or no?
What's that?
Ain't it the saltiest sea
Oh,
too?
hi. Is it salty? They told me whenever we got there, they said, just don't get your eyes underwater. And I thought, well, what fun is that? They say you can't really go underwater, and what fun is it if I don't try to go underwater? So, I was stubborn, and I was a swimmer and all that, and I thought, well, I'm going to go underwater and see. Man, I pushed myself underwater, and that water is so salty. It just burned my eyes. Something fierce. So I come crawling out of the water. Somebody give me a towel. Somebody give me a towel. To dry my eyes off a little bit, and
Yeah, they say it's the saltiest place on earth.
It's terribly salty. Really, really salty. Like all around it's a beautiful area, very pretty. But all around this area, there are, like the rocks, there are salt deposits all over it and stuff like that. So, and then this is this Transjordanian area here, across the Jordan River. This is, there's a few things that kind of take place around the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus goes across the Sea of Galilee and stuff. Again, for the most part, this area doesn't really serve much of a role. So most of what we're reading about is kind of taking place in this area here, and in between. That's most of the New Testament, what we're looking at geographically. But that's the kind of the land. I mean, these mountain areas here, this area here is very, very rugged, very, very desolate. I mean, this whole area, I was in Amman.
Is that the same Jabbok? I'm sorry. Oh, my bad. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
That's the same Jabbok where, what's his name? Jacob turned to Israel?
I'm sorry, the same what?
Jabbok, like if you go back one slide.
Oh, yeah.
The Jabbok River right there. On the right next to Gilead, southeast of Gilead.
Gilead right here.
Southeast.
South.
Go down.
Oh, okay, right here.
Yeah, that's the same where he turned into Israel. I'm just asking. I ain't trying to.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure. And then, the Eastern Desert. So, this is the whole area here. But, we went from Amman, Jordan, and we went down here kind of to has anybody seen Ben-Hur and stuff like, that movie? It's an old movie at this point, but, it took place in Wadi Rum. It's a beautiful area, spectacular. But, and then kind of went back up to this direction here along the Dead Sea, and then we stayed right around there. This area here is very mountainous, very rugged, pretty desolate. Kind of coming through here, it's just like, little bitty bushes, very, very dry. It's not desert in the sense of being sand. It's kind of rocky and hard soil, but it's just desolate. There's nothing that's hot. And, yeah. So, all right. This is kind of looking at it from a different perspective. We still have your coastal plain, the mountain area there, the river rift, and then then the other sides there. I can't remember. Central Mountain Range and the Transjordanian Mountains. So we have all that. We're just kind of looking at it from a different direction, and you see kind of how everything goes down, to there. Jerusalem again. I'm trying to see if I'm trying to pick up where is. Oh, this is the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so we're up around the north. The Dead Sea is further down this way. So this is the northern regions. Jesus was, in this area. Jesus was called a Nazarene, right? He was born, here in Nazareth.
What desert was he in for 40 days and 40 nights?
Well, the desert. It says he was driven out to the wilderness And the wilderness, what they learned is that area that I was describing to you, where just kind of not really desert per se. There's an occasional tree. It's desolate, nothing there, and you look out and there's a lonesome green tree on the side of a mountain or something like that. There's water there. There's for some reason there's a seep or something like that. There's water there. So it would have. I don't know. I don't know exactly where Jesus was. Where the temptation took place, but it would have been in some of this range. Here probably that rocky. So it was actually closer down toward Jerusalem because it said they took him to Jerusalem. So, so here we're looking at the heights. Jerusalem is the high point at around 2,500 feet above sea level. And then, the Dead Sea here is around, like I said, looks like around 1,000. I think it's around 1,000, 1,200 feet. So you have the sea level here. It kind of rises up, goes down to the Jordanian Rift. This obviously is the lowest point, and then back up, and then into that range there. So it's we're just looking at the topography from a variety of different angles there. I already looked at that. This is looking at it from north to south. So you're looking at it kind of from this way. Some of the high points. Okay. Yeah, looking at Jerusalem and then going down here. So some of the terrain along that topography. And then the other thing we can see are the roads. And this is not a great map, but there were Roman roads at this point, and so they were cut through the area. And and Israel plays its central role because it's you got to cross through it. There's a lot up here and there's a lot down here. This is all desert here. Nobody traveled through that. So in the broader history of things, a lot went through there, and which would have made this place a fairly, at least your larger cities, it was at the crossroads. So, while it was distinct, in its culture and all that, they would have had influences and probably been aware of some of the broader things in society because of its role as that that crossroads there. All right, well that's the map. Any questions about any of those? Would you like a second view of anything? So just the position, and it's helpful to know where all this is taking place. All right, so now we're looking at the intertestamental period. This intertestamental period. And this is the period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That period there. A lot of this stuff I've taken from your book. And so if you don't understand it or would like to understand it, to gain a little more insight into that, a lot of it's I've taken from your book. I think there is one section that I took from the ESV Study Bible. And if I remember correctly, I'm sorry I didn't go back and check this, but if I remember correctly, I have that article posted in Blackboard, about some of the things that are taking place there. So, all right, so let's consider this intertestamental period. So the Old Testament books, the last of the Old Testament book was you have Malachi, and then is the last book contained in the Old Testament. But as far as time frames, the Old Testament ends or cuts off at around 433 BC is Nehemiah. Around 433 BC is the closing of the Old Testament. Good up? All right, Jesus' birth. When did I say Jesus was born?
Like 14 AD or something like that.
7
7 to 4 BC. So sometime in that time frame there. So sometime between 7 and 4 BC. So what that leaves us with, we have this period between the closing of the Old Testament books and Jesus' birth, and it leaves us with the 400 silent years. Not exactly 400 silent years, but it's a little bit more than that. But it's this year, these 400 years of there are no biblical documents that are received as authoritative, written during this time period. There are no prophets, as far as we know. I think it's safe to assume there are no prophets. And there's history. There are things going on, but from the perspective of us, looking at it, part of the New Testament class takes into account, and we seek to understand something of what was going on in these 400 silent years. Because while it's not written there in the pages, it's very much a part of what is going on in the life of the people. Because that's their history. That's the events that are going on in their immediate area. So we're looking at this period, beginning with Nehemiah and around that era, is what is called Second Temple Judaism. Second Temple Judaism, and what that's referring to is in the history of Israel, the first temple was destroyed, and they rebuilt it. And in the rebuilding, in that time period, so you have in the history, in the Old Testament, you have the United, this is an overview of all of it, but you have the United Monarchy, and then the Divided Monarchy, so in Israel, the land of Israel is ruled by a single monarch, Saul, David, Solomon, and Rehoboam. I'm just giving you background at this point, so don't sweat it too much, but just kind of recognize what's going on. So you have this united monarchy, and then with Rehoboam, he ruled over the united monarchy for just a few days, and then the monarchy divided, and the nation of Israel split in two. So you have the southern kingdom becoming its own, Judah, and then the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom are splitting off. Garrett, you want to come up here and finish it up?
No.
You good?
I was fixing to tell you about the tribes, but you did it, so I didn't have to.
All right. Garrett just had me for Old Testament, so we look at all this stuff. So you have the divided monarchy. And Garrett, what's after the divided monarchy?
Is it Exodus or
Exile.
yeah?
So after the divided monarchy, they're carried off into exile. So the southern kingdom, Judah, fell in 538 BC. And so at that point, they're deported into Babylon. With this is the destruction of the temple. So the first temple goes back, is destroyed here, and then they have the post-exilic period. And in this post-exilic temple, they return to the land. They establish the country as something of what it was, but much weaker. The nation wasn't as strong, and they rebuild the temple. So the temple is rebuilt. And then we have these 400 silent years called Second Temple Judaism, and then the New Testament. So that's kind of the historical overview of what we're looking at here and what's going on. So this whole period, in between is what's called Second Temple Judaism, and in that period, there's the Persian period from like 531 to 331 BC. And, they were ruled. There was this outside rule of the Persians. King Cyrus captured the Babylonians. So the Babylonians are deposed. King Cyrus, the Persian, captured them. And then in your book on page 26, it says, his enlightened policy allowed conquered people who had been sent into exile to return to their native lands to reestablish themselves as semi-autonomous units under his benevolent leadership. That's true. So he allowed the people to go back to their original lands and establish themselves as a semi-autonomous government. They had some degree, what semi-autonomous means, right? They had some degree of self-government, but yet they still kind of were under Persian rule. But he was benevolent. He kind of left them alone. If you don't cause any problems for me, I'm not going to cause too big of problems for you. Just, yeah, fair enough. All right, so then the next period is Hellenism. What is the Hellenistic period? What is Hellenism?
You got to do with a female?
Greek
No.
culture.
Greek culture.
I've read it.
Oh, I thought we had a ringer.
Yeah, it is this period of Greek influence in the area. This is where I get from the ESV Study Bible. The Persians were supplanted by the Greeks under Alexander the Great. So he ruled from 334 to 323.
What's what supplanted mean?
Overtaking. Supplanted. I said surplanted, but it's supplanted. Supplant. Deposed, overtaken, thrown out.
Beaten by.
Alexander the Great. So if you're familiar with history, Alexander the Great was a Hellenistic, a Greek king / general who conquered broad area. I mean, he was one of the most successful, of that era. So Alexander the Great, in addition to military conquest and political control, Alexander was intent on spreading Greek culture, Hellenistic culture, including the Greek language. So what language is the New Testament written in?
Greek.
Bunch of them, man.
Greek.
Oh.
Greek. It was the Old Testament's written in Hebrew, but by the time we get to the New Testament, it's written in Greek because that was the lingua franca, the language of the people was Greek. So there's this during this time period here from 331 to 164. There's this broad spread of Greek culture. Well, Greek culture and Jewish culture are like oil and water, though. They really didn't fit together too well. For that matter, Persian culture too. Although the Persian culture was a little more, kind of hands off, as I understand it. But with this, there's a during this whole period, Persian period, Hellenistic period, there's a seething resentment rising on the part of Israel. They're not Greek. They don't want to become Greek. They don't, but that's being carried in, under the leadership of Alexander the Great and his rulers that ruled after him. So, in this next period is this Hasmonean period, or the Maccabean period, from 164 to 63 BC. This period, and you should have read about this already. In fact, I could have you guys tell me about it, right? No, maybe not. But so this period is the period when Matthias, the priest, resisted Antiochus' attempt to force pagan worship on Israel by killing the king's representatives. And they actually went into the temple and into the Jewish temple and I think sacrificed a pig there, defaced the temple. I mean, you can imagine, that's going to excite the Jewish people. So with the hope of the Hasidim, a period of pious warriors, they waged war against the Syrians. The leadership was exercised by this family, the Hasmonean family. And for the next 103 years until Ptolemies conquered Jerusalem in 63 BC. So this Hasmonean dynasty is seen here. You have Matthias in 65 AD, and then you have just this transfer of leadership during this period. I don't expect you to know these people, but these people are, it's kind of like a Jewish resurgence, a rise of Jewish nationalism, and actually kind of held on for 103 years. So they had that, but ultimately it wasn't strong. And then you have the Roman period, which went from like 63 BC to 70 AD. You see a little bit of overlap here, but so the Roman period from 63 BC to 70 AD. And I'll be honest, I mean, this is not an area that I have vast knowledge. This is not, it's not a, I mean, we need to, kind of be aware of the various areas, but it's not my area of study and kind of my first love or whatever. So, but, during this Roman period, there's this, well, let's look at some of the things that characterize this Roman period. So there's a Roman insult and Jewish hatred. So when Pompey took Jerusalem, so this is where he did it, sorry. He entered into the temple and even the most holy place. So no, a Gentile ruler wasn't supposed to enter into the temple. But under Jewish rule, Pompey entered into the temple. To the Jews, this was the ultimate insult and sacrilege. The Romans could not understand why the Jews resented this exercise of privilege. Right there, the Romans are the ruling country, so they should be able to go into the temple. Well, the Jewish people thought, you have done a major wrong here, and from the Jewish perspective, they had. But the Roman people are like, well, what's the deal? We're in charge now. We can do whatever we want. So you see this, this undercurrent that's going on here. And so, hence, deep suspicion and ill will began growing, lasting for over a century until the Jews rebelled. The Romans destroyed the Jewish state. The New Testament reader must remain aware of the seething undercurrent that colors much of what takes place, even during the ministry of Jesus. So, that's this seething undercurrent of Jewish resentment is very present in the ministry of Jesus. And it's not that Jesus is entering into the political situation and kind of fanning the fires of this Jewish nationalism and saying, oh, look at the Romans, cast them out. He's not entering into that debate. That's not his concern. But the people are very aware of it, and on their mind, that's at the front of their concerns. So that's one of the characteristics of this Roman period, is a Jewish hatred, or this rising degree of insult and animosity. But there are other aspects of the Roman period which are characterized. One of them is the Pax Romana. That's a broader period, and what it refers to is the peace of Rome. And it was maintained by something of a strong fist, but nevertheless, there was this general period of peace that existed within this time period. They had a certain degree of safety, and safety. They weren't fearful of various invading nations around them coming in and taking place. The Romans would have crushed it. They didn't tolerate that stuff. So they were strong militarily, and the result was a degree of peace. The Roman roads, you remember that road system that existed in this? This allowed for, enterprise, for, just the movement of people with greater ease than they'd had any time before. From what I understand, there are places in Israel where the Roman roads are still in existence. I mean, in Alaska, we can't even build a road the last 10 years, and somehow they've managed to build roads that lasted a couple of thousand years. Now, granted, there are a lot of differences, but still, it's an engineering marvel of what they did as far as the building of the roads and stuff, and that had an impact upon the broader society. Things were moving and whatnot. The other thing was Herod the Great. Herod the Great was appointed by the Roman Senate, sorry, I can't pronounce that word right now, to be the king of all of Palestine. Until his day, until his death in 4 BC, he maintained that position, cooperating with the Romans and the emperor to maintain his power. Jesus was born during this period, during the period of Herod the Great. Jesus flees to Egypt during the period of Herod the Great, because he has to flee. There's a killing of the children in Bethlehem. So Herod the Great is he's a kind of a strong hand type person, probably certifiably crazy. There's a play on words concerning Herod the Great. They say it's safer to be his, I don't know exactly, I can't remember the Greek words, but it goes something like, safer to be his Weiss than his Huss, or something. It may be backwards, vice versa. But what it is you hear how the words kind of sound similarly. What it means is it's safer to be Herod's pig than it is to be his son. Because he ended up killing all of his sons and his wives. Anything that he perceived as a threat to his power, he just annihilated. No threats were allowed. But one of the things that characterized Herod's period is he catered to the Romans, and obviously he had to be kind to the Romans in order to maintain his control. But he started a great building period, and they have what is called Herod's Temple. And Herod spent, let me see if I have my notes here, about 19 to 20 BC, he began enlarging and reconstructing the temple in Jerusalem. The main work was completed fairly quickly, but additional improvements continued until 64 BC. So that, you can imagine that garnered a certain degree of favor among the Jewish people, and probably kept that seething animosity as a result of Jewish or Roman rule, kind of kept it down to some degree, to where they're like, we still have something here. So Second Temple Judaism, let's think about this just a little bit. Second Temple Judaism it's a collection of ideas and practices. What is the American rule? What is the American thought right now concerning immigration?
If you're illegal, you should be out of the country.
Yeah, that's the
On
official
one side.
policy. But is there if we had a debate and said, what is the policy, the right policy for America concerning immigration? Do you think we would all agree
No.
on what it should be and whatnot? So, and we could name off any number of political issues, and there would be disagreement. So, as we look at this Second Temple Judaism, we shouldn't view it as like, kind of everyone during this period agreed with this idea. It's a general collection of ideas that that characterize this era without being. I think in your book it says this there was not a single normative view, but rather overlapping, even conflicting ideas and practices that all together are called Second Temple Judaism. So this, we've already talked about this, but it began around 538 to 515 BCE with the destruction of the temple, and continued to the destruction of the temple around 70. 70 AD, I don't require you to remember many dates for this class, but 70 AD is one of those dates that you have to know. 70 AD represents the destruction of the temple by the Romans. We'll bring it up on a number of occasions. This isn't the only time we'll talk about it, but you know, it comes into play here. So the Second Temple Judaism is a period that, you know, between the first reconstruction of the temple until it's finally destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Finally, the Jews, around 70 AD, the Jews, this says CE, remember I talked about that common era, that because I'm quoting this from Oxford, and they use the BCE and CE. I didn't want to change that, but it's AD.
What was the temple called?
The temple?
Okay.
I'm not being smart aleck, but am I missing your, what do you mean by that?
Well, I was just asking the name of the temple, but I'm guessing it's not important. Just the date.
Oh yeah, well they did have, you know, at some point, you know, around, you know, as Herod the Great began his temple, it was kind of called Herod's temple, you know, because of all the work that was begun by Herod and it continued on.
So this was his temple.
Yeah, it was Second Temple Judaism. You know, during the Ezra and Nehemiah time period, they rebuild the temple, and it kind of continues on, and then around 37 AD, I think, or 37 BC, I think Herod the Great came in around 19 to 20 BC. He began the improvements of the temple. So it's one space that, you know, the temple was the same temple, but it had improvements by Herod the Great. Garrett, do you have a question?
Yeah. Did the Roman fall the same year that they destroyed the temple?
No, I think the fall of Rome was several years later than that.
Yeah, I was just saying because on the time period for the Roman period, it was 63 BC to 70 AD.
Oh yeah. Well, basically at 70 AD, Israel was no more.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it was the distinct culture of Israel was. The temple was leveled. Second Temple Judaism is no more because there is no more temple. It's leveled.
Makes sense.
So I didn't understand the gist of your question, but yeah, that's what's going on there.